Good morning, everyone. May I have your attention, please? Welcome to Government House. As official proceedings will shortly commence, now would be an opportune moment to check that your mobile phones are switched off or turned to silent. As the Governor arrives, you will be asked to stand and remain standing. A fanfare will be played, followed by the Vice-Regal salute. This sounds like the Australian national anthem, the distinction being that you do not sing. You'll be given the opportunity to sing the Australian national anthem at the conclusion of the ceremony. Throughout the presentation of awards this morning, please hold your applause until all recipients' names and citations have been read. When I return to the lectern, it will be to announce the arrival of Her Excellency. Thank you. Would you please be upstanding for the arrival of Her Excellency, Professor the Honourable Margaret Gardner, Governor of Victoria.
Please be seated. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which this house stands, the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and to Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. Your Excellency, I invite you to present the honours and awards in the Order of Australia. To be a companion of the Order of Australia, the Honourable Mark Samuel Weinberg, for eminent service to the law, to the judiciary, to legal education, and as a mentor to juristic practitioners and academics. To be officers in the General Division, Dr. Geraldine Atkinson, for distinguished service to the Indigenous community, to education, to First Nations self-determination, and to reconciliation. Professor Christine Bigby, for distinguished service to people with intellectual disabilities, to social welfare and inclusion research, policy and practice, and to tertiary education. Diane Blood, for distinguished service to mechanical engineering through innovation and robotic design, and to diversity and inclusion. Georgina Harmon, for distinguished service to mental health sector, to the LBGTQIA+ community, and to not-for-profit organisations. To be members in the General Division, Professor Michael John Abramson, for significant service to medicine as a respiratory physician and as a researcher. Professor Lisa Helen Amir, for significant service to women's health, particularly breastfeeding research and support. Distinguished Professor Vasso Apostolopoulos, for significant service to medical research, particularly immunology. Marnie Ann Baker, for significant service to the financial and banking sectors. Anthony Henry Barry, for significant service to civil engineering. Greta Jessie Bradman, for significant service to the performing arts in a range of roles and to psychology. Brian Carlisle Cook, for significant service to Australian rules football, to business and to the community. Associate Professor Charles Frederick Cork, for significant service to intensive care medicine as a clinician, administrator and researcher. James Anthony Demetriou for significant service to sport, to education and to business. Andrew Roy Dwyer for significant service to the tourism industry in Victoria and to the community. Dr. Catherine Mary Hutton for significant service to general practice medicine and to healthcare system improvement. The late Dr. Murray William Johns, to be received by his wife, Penelope Johns, in recognition of his service to sleep medicine and research. The late Dr. Sanjeev Koshi, to be received by his wife, Rajini George, in recognition of his significant service to dentistry, particularly through board and leadership roles. Charles Masek, for significant service to corporate governance and to the financial services industry. Associate Professor Maria Catherine McCarthy, for significant service to paediatric psycho-oncology research and education. Rebecca Joy McGrath, for significant service to business through leadership roles in compliance, audit and finance. Karen Michelle Millward, for significant service to Indigenous advocacy and to reconciliation. Jane Laidley Nathan, for significant service to local government, to state planning and to sport. To be members in the Military Division, Brigadier Michelle Jane Campbell, for exceptional service to the Australian Army as the Deputy Commander of the 2nd Australian Division and as Commander of the 4th Brigade. Brigadier John Paul Ouvrier for exceptional service across multiple leadership appointments in the acquisition and sustainment of vehicle, joint health and joint logistic capabilities within the land domain. To receive the Public Service Medal, Natale Cutri for outstanding public service in leadership and advocacy for people with disability. Andrew Martin Fennessy for outstanding public service in modernising water infrastructure. Rachel Green for outstanding public service in family violence, sexual assault and women's safety reforms. Lisa Healy for outstanding public service in enhancing access to quality vocational training and employment. Robert John Hortle for outstanding public service in industrial relations, workplace regulation and fair employment practices. Vito Mazzone for outstanding public service in the introduction of taxation and superannuation teaching resources into the Australian school curriculum. Peta McCammon for outstanding public service in reforms in disability services and family violence prevention. Marlene K. Morrison for outstanding public service in improving outcomes for people in custody and offenders in the community. Lisa Jacqueline Saxton for outstanding public service in enhancing governance, integrity and reforms in the Victorian racing industry. Dr. Karen Sutherland for outstanding public service in the protection of vulnerable children and families. To receive the Australian Corrections Medal for Distinguished Corrections Service, Gavin Roy Blair. Colin Kendall. Rebecca Elizabeth Warburton. To receive the Medal of the Order of Australia in the General Division, Gary Frederick Alsop, for service to people with spinal cord injury and other disabilities. Dr. John Paul Airby, for service to veterinary science. Emeritus Professor Robert Baines, for service to the creative arts, particularly as a jeweller, and to education. Andrew Douglas Baxter, for service to the community through fundraising contributions. The late David Leslie Berry, to be received by his wife, Sally Polak, in recognition of his service to conservation and to the environment. Neville John Betts, for service to occupational health and safety. David Scott Blackhall, for service to the automotive industry. Susan Brunskill, for service to conservation and the environment. Faye Lorraine Campbell, for service to basketball administration. Barry Ernst Capuano, for service to Australian rules football. The late Graham Henry Colson, to be received by Sergeant Fiona Colson in recognition of his service to the community of Wangaratta. Helen Louise Comport, for service to veterans and their families. The Reverend Canon Dr. James Timothy Connolly, for service to the communities of Gippsland. Dr. Rosalie May Cooper, for service to medicine through a range of roles. Louisa Catherine Copel, for service to the film and television industry. Jane Frances Crawley, for service to the arts and cultural equity. Anna Clarabelle Creighton, for service to the community of Cobram. Peter John Crocker, for service to industrial relations, particularly through trade unions. Peter William Datson, for service to youth through Scouts. Maureen Therese Davey, for service to people who are deaf or hard of hearing. William James Delaney, for service to the community through not-for-profit organisations. Judith Dickstein, for service to the law and to community health. Maureen Doonan, for service to the community of Ballarat. John Gerard Dowling for service to the community through service groups. Maria Bernadette Dowling for service to the community through volunteer roles. The late Dr. John Charles Dyson Berry, to be received by his wife, Julie Kelm, in recognition of his service to medicine as a general practitioner. Nancy Jean Emblin for service to sport and to the community. Gerda Mary Evans for service to breast cancer awareness. Nola Marie Evans for service to the community of Bonnie Doon. Mark William Ford for service to music education and to the arts. Bill Forrest for service to urban planning, the arts and to the community. Julia Ann Fraser for service to education, particularly Asian studies. Mansell Gray Giddings for service to the community of Witchyproof. Thomas Robert Gorog for service to the community through a range of roles. Ronald Richard Gowdy for service to the community of Horsham. Roslyn Gale Greenwood for service to literature. Lynette Mary Grokey for service to sustainable housing and to the environment. Lynn Patrice Harris for service to the community through social welfare organisations. Leslie John Harrison for service to the communities of Tungamar and Cobram. John Alexander Hirsch for service to the rail industry. Bruce Charles Holland for service to the communities of North East Melbourne. Jennifer Louise Houghton for service to the community of Wangaratta. John Thomas Houghton for service to the community of Wangaratta. Jennifer Olivia Hunt for service to animal welfare. Jennifer Huppert for service to multicultural affairs through a range of organisations. Philip Ivanov for service to the creative arts in Victoria. Gopinath Surya Narayanan, Aya, for service to music. Ramanath Surya Ranayanan, Aya, for service to music. The Reverend Dr. Robert Bennett Johnson for service to education and to the Uniting Church in Australia. Derek Hubert Jones for service to the community of Beaumaris. Kenneth Francis Jones to be received by his wife, Anne Jones, for service to the community of Bendigo. Associate Professor Melita Mary Jones for service to education. The late Joan Jordan to be received by her daughter Gail Ryan and her son Gary Jordan in recognition of her service to the community of Cobram. Joyce Lorraine Knight for service to veterans and their families. Richard John Knight for service to the community of East Melbourne. Associate Professor Jeffrey Lefkowitz for service to medicine as a cardiologist. John Vincent Mackey for service to the law and to the community. Simon Allen Marks for service to youth. Peter Marshall for service to Australian Rules Football. Christopher Levitt May for service to veteran welfare and to the community. James Andrew McLeod, for service to the community of Melbourne. Kleoniki Matsiaris Garai, for service to the Greek community of Victoria. Robert William McLaughlin, for service to architecture and to social welfare. Neil Alexander Robertson, for service to snooker. Gary Schickerling, for service to cricket. To receive the Medal of the Order of Australia in the Military Division, Warrant Officer Class 2 Colin Leonard Hughes Smith, for meritorious service as Alpha Company Training Warrant Officer and Drum Major of the Pipes and Drums, the 5th 6th Battalion, the Royal Victorian Regiment. Warrant Officer Class 1 Sean David McElhenney, for meritorious performance of duty as Regimental Sergeant Major of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment and the School of Armour. To receive the Conspicuous Service Medal, Warrant Officer Class 1 Dennis Allen Barlow, for meritorious achievement in Guided Weapon and Explosive Ordnance Test and Workforce Management in Joint Capabilities Group. Warrant Officer Class 1 Susan Louise Gallagher, for meritorious devotion to duty as an Army Transition Warrant Officer, providing transition support to Army's people and their families transitioning from defence. Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Thomas Robinson, for meritorious devotion to duty as Staff Officer Grade 1, Command, Support, Trade and Training, Defence Command, Support Training Centre. To receive the Commendation for Distinguished Service, Sergeant Gary William Wilkes, for distinguished performance of duties in warlike operations as the Battle Support Group Transport Troop Commander, 1st Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment Group, Somalia, during Operation Solace from 18 January 1993 to 18 May 1993. Please join Her Excellency in congratulating all of today's recipients. Your Excellency, I now invite you to address us.
Jeremy Moole, Secretary, and Joshua Pulls, Deputy Secretary, Justice and Public Administration, Department of Premier and Cabinet. Bridget Monagle, Commissioner, Victorian Public Sector Commission. Larissa Strong, Commissioner, Corrections, Victoria. Cassie Boons, representing the Chairperson, Victorian Multicultural Commission. Brigadier John Holloway, representing the Senior Army Officer of Victoria. Captain Paul Scott, representing the Senior Naval Officer of Victoria. Fred Harrington, Chair, the Order of Australia Association Victoria branch, and all the many distinguished guests who are with us today, including, of course, the very special people who've received Australian honours this morning. Let me also begin by acknowledging we meet here on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nations and pay my respect to their elders past and present, and to recognise that indeed we have significant elders in the room with us today. This is a special year, as it turns out, in Australian honours, about which I want to comment. In the late 1960s, and I know there are some people in the room who can remember that, in the late 1960s, Donald Horne decried what he called the great emptiness of Australia and spoke of the people's yearning for an idealisation of some good, new and interesting thing that Australians might become. Donald Horne was nothing if not inclined to the glass half full view of the world. Horne, however, captured the zeitgeist of a nation caught between its colonial past and the desire for some distinct and it was then, still ill-formed or uncertain future identity. The following years, as we moved from the 60s to the 70s, brought a cultural transformation to Australia, generating a national consciousness surrounding the questions of who we are as a people and what it means to be an Australian. Sensing this moment, the It's Time speech of 1972 called for a new vision of what we can achieve in this generation of our nation and the region in which we live. And every single one of those phrases, if you like, is significant. The new vision for us and in the region in which we live. By the mid-1970s, it was apparent that Australia had arrived at that time, not only because of the opportunities that were now available and being seized by Australians. It was a time of not unalloyed prosperity, but pretty solid prosperity. And through the 1970s, the opportunities for education, for health, for a prosperous and good life expanded. And indeed, new horizons opened across the globe for Australians. For those of us, and I am an us in this context, for those of us who lived through it, the feeling of excitement in those years was palpable. Out of this era sprang important Australian cultural institutions, institutions for self-expression and understanding of ourselves as a people, a national library, a national archive, and a national gallery, all occurring just as we started the search for a national anthem of our own. government funded a chair in Australian studies in the US, which is still there at Harvard. And that's a sort of a tiny indication, but it was an indication to the world that we had a distinct story to tell and that it was worth listening to, no matter where you were in the world. Our immigration policies greatly expanded the number of people coming to Australia and from the areas from which they came, creating a group, a cohort, a series of cohorts of new migrants with which we could exchange ideas about ourselves. In this period of self-definition in the 1970s, the Australian Honours System was born. That's where we created these honours that we've handed out today. Viewed through this lens, the lens of that culturally transformative moment, the creation of this Australian Honours System was not so much a rejection of the adopted British honours, which had prior to that dominated the way we had recognised people in Australia, because that was then the norm until the 70s, but it was actually an embrace of our future as a modern nation and as all it could be. You might say to yourself, it's a long time from federation at the beginning of the 20th century to get to the 1970s and say, we're surer about who we are. But it's always a question that we're asking ourselves. This, however, if you look at through the Australian Honours lens, was us saying that we had a future where we held the pen to write our own story. The Australian Honours System, which brings us here today, is 50 years since its inception this year. Its establishment didn't create a new national identity, but it was one very important avenue through which we could explore that question. The contributions we've just celebrated, as you've heard people recognise today, go to the heart of what we value as a community, as a state, and as a nation. They're the things we value. Though the awards are only summarised here in a short citation, and every member of family and friends who's had someone honoured can see the full contribution behind it, each of these honours always speaks to something much greater than the citation. It may represent, and often does, and you heard it today, many decades of volunteering, of time and effort in service to others. Communities of different types right across this state and this nation. It may represent a dedication to achieving excellence in a field that our community rightly admires. Or it may represent the power of an idea that's enacted to create positive change that will uplift fellow citizens. All of those contributions are worthy of celebration, and we've seen them demonstrated today, and that's what we're here doing. We're celebrating them. Collectively, they form part of our national story. This is the story we're telling to ourselves. 50 years on from the establishment of our own honours system, this identity is not fixed, it's still unfurling, and we continue to ask those important questions about who we are and what we care about to ourselves, and so we should. Australian values are more than what is captured in a verse or a song or taught in the early classes at school or asked in the questions of a citizenship test. It's always more than those things. It's actually best measured by what we do rather than what we say about ourselves. And how we choose to celebrate the deeds we admire goes a long way to expressing what is at the heart of our identity. As new generations arrive, born or arriving here from elsewhere, we cannot assume that they will simply commit to the values we sometimes talk about in those verses, those early classes at school, or we try and capture in questions in a citizenship test. Sustaining our identity and building it into the future relies on us continuing to explore what we care about as a community, and most importantly, demonstrating the actions we value. These honours remain one of our most important avenues for doing just that. Congratulations to everyone who's been recognised here today, and thank you to all of those, many of whom are in the room, who've supported you in your contributions. Your stories, and we have unfortunately have some people's stories who are being honoured by their families because they are unable to be here. That is always a sad thing, but we are still honouring all those stories because they're the threads of the broader story of our nation. One that I'm certain you will all continue to play a part in writing in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. If you are able to do so, would you please stand and join heartily in singing the first verse of the Australian National Anthem and remain standing for the departure of Her Excellency.
That concludes official proceedings for today. On behalf of all of us at Government House, we congratulate all the award recipients. The State Apartments will now be open for viewing, including a display in the State Drawing Room to mark the 50th anniversary of the Australian Honours and Awards. On behalf of the Governor, we invite you to stay and to enjoy the hospitality of Government House. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.